kumbuka mapendo, kumbuka utumilivu, kumbuka mwendo, kumbuka moyo wako. Breathe.
Well, hello, everybody. A very warm welcome to you. Thank you all for being with us this evening. This is the Threads of Healing Voices of Breathwork-Africa series. This is the fourth in the series of conversations, and I am your host, Dr. Ila Manga, and I'm the founder of Breathwork-Africa. So the reason that we have decided to have this series is because we have such an awesome community of practitioners at Breathwork-Africa. And often in the world of breathwork, there are only a few voices that are heard. And if you have been on our courses and you attend some of our masterclasses, you probably used to seeing one of us on the team. And yet there are so many incredible people in this community doing work on the ground every single day. And it is important for us to bring space to these voices and for us to create a platform where you can hear these voices and learn from this incredible community that is just so wise and has so much richness and so much to share. And so this evening, I am incredibly honored to welcome someone who is very special to me, someone who I've known for, I worked it out, almost 20 years. I think it's 20 years now, and who I've traveled a really long and beautiful journey with. And she is a certified breathwork practitioner, but also so much more than that. So Dr. Yasmin Jessie Turton is just the most remarkable woman. She has committed her life to activism, to social justice, to supporting those who don't have a voice, to supporting those who are doing work on the ground. And through her personal journey, she has expanded and deepened her own practice and is supporting so many people from such a deep, wise, and beautiful place. And I feel incredibly blessed to be introducing you to Jessie this evening and to have this conversation. We're going to be having a bit of a chat around Jessie's work, a little bit about how she came into this work and the work she did with her doctoral thesis, what she focused on, and then Jessie will be leading us into a little breathwork session at the end. So, Jessie, a very warm welcome to you. Thank you so much for being here this evening.
Thank you, Ila, very much, and for those warm words. And greetings, everyone. I greet you in the name of peace. I'm looking forward to our conversation.
Thank you, Jessie. So what comes up for you as you hear someone reflect on your journey in this way and talking about it? Like, what is happening for you in being here this evening?
Yeah. Gosh, so I've come such a long way on this particular journey. My background is social work. And many years ago, when I qualified as a very young social worker, I went into social work and I realized that this is not what I was meant to do. I was dealing with people who were poor, who were unemployed, and the only tools that I was taught as a social work student was a very Western approach to dealing with people's issues. And the people who I was seeing, I was in child welfare for many years, I just couldn't connect. I couldn't connect with them. They couldn't connect with me because the tools that I'd been taught as a social worker was just not relevant or appropriate to them.
Yeah.
So I stayed in social work only for about 4 or 5 years. And I then left and joined the social justice sector. And I worked in the social justice sector. Well, all my life, I still continue to work in the social justice sector. But then about 10 years or 15 years ago, actually, I got a call saying, do you want to lecture at the University of Johannesburg in social work? And so I thought, well, let me see what this is about. And I went to work as a lecturer. And one of the first things they told me, which they didn't tell me when I joined, was, well, one of your KPIs is that you have to have a PhD. So every lecturer who comes in has to do their PhD. And I thought, gosh, this wasn't my life journey at all. But if I'm going to spend 3 years studying, then I'm going to do it in something that I'm really interested in. Over the years, I had done Reiki, I'd done meditation, I'd got in touch with Breathwork-Africa. So I've been doing all of that, but that was with my social justice work. So I went into UJ, started my doctorate, changed my topic twice, and then decided I wanted to look at complementary and indigenous practices and how you can use that with vulnerable communities. And that started my journey of looking at how I could take what I had learned, the tools that I had acquired over the years around complementary and indigenous practices, and taking it to really vulnerable communities. And so that's where I started the journey of looking at it as part of my PhD. And it was incredible. I can share some of the findings as we talk, but I mean, the journey of those 3 years was such an important turning point for me. And I felt in a way vindicated that in fact, what we are doing with like our social work students was teaching them something that wasn't relevant to practice. And so, yeah. So that is basically where I got to where I am. And when I talk about my work in the social justice sector, I work across many sectors: gender-based violence, work mostly with a lot of women who are very vulnerable through poverty, through unemployment, through gender-based violence. And whatever work I do, whether I'm facilitating a strategy session or doing a training, I introduce breath work. And a couple of weeks ago, it's so interesting, I was working in one of the very gangster-ridden community in the Western Cape. I was working with an organization there, and I taught the women the breathwork practice of roaring like a lion. And I wish I can play back to you. They've adopted that. These are women who come from Philippi, a really poor community. They try to work with community around child protection, around gender-based violence, and this has become their song. They use it as a song. They've changed the whole thing. Roar like a lion, and they use it as part of their own breathing. It's so amazing. So I do that wherever I can when I'm running workshops, because it's not breath workshops, but I introduce and integrate breath work into the work that I do within the social justice sector.
Wow, that's fascinating, Jessie. Thanks for sharing that. You know, as you're speaking, I'm thinking about a conversation I had with somebody yesterday who is a social entrepreneur and was talking about how they've been bringing or trying to bring some of these meditation practices into their corporate settings and business environment, and how it's met with such resistance because there's an expectation for someone to sit quietly for 30 minutes, and how inaccessible that is. And that often meditation, this idea of meditation, is based on a particular Eastern practice that is then brought into this particular context. And so he was asking me about our approach to breath work, because he felt that in Africa, our practices are very movement orientated, and they're so rhythmic, and we work with music and drumming, and it's a very embodied practice. So, as you're sharing your experience with the communities that you worked with in the Western Cape, I'm thinking about that and how that resonated, and also what your experience has been with Indigenous practices. What do you mean by Indigenous practices? What falls under that category? And how has your approach to breathwork supported more Indigenous and relevant kind of approach?
Yeah. So when I worked in Garankuwa, which is a really, really poor community outside Pretoria, and that's where I did my PhD, very conservative community. I thought very religious community, and I thought they would just scoff at this idea of breath work and meditation and so on. And so I went into work with them. And one of the first things that became a reality is that when we talk Indigenous, so for example, having rituals in the community is quite an Indigenous practice. Drumming is quite an Indigenous practice, as is movement and dancing. It's an Indigenous practice. Meditation is not really an Indigenous practice, or that's what we thought. But then I really started reading up on it and realized that within traditional African communities, contemplative practices is a very acceptable thing. It's been there all the years. It's called contemplative practices rather than meditation. And so I also started adjusting my vocabulary for that. And so, yes, there are those that are Indigenous. Mine was complementary and Indigenous specifically because I think we haven't yet fully engaged with Indigenous practices and what that means at a community level and for communities. I had a traditional healer who was part of my training in Garankuwa. And it was so interesting because she was saying, and she very often in communities where there are no social services, the traditional healer is the first point of call. So even when someone is raped in the community, there's no immediate police station, there's no social work services immediately available. The first place they go to is a traditional healer. And so this traditional healer, I was teaching the finger holes and breath work, how to breathe, balance breathing, because she, as we were doing these practices, she said, I can use that when people come to me. When they face certain traumas, I can use that. And so in a sense, what I was doing was, or what she was saying is, when people come to me, and she was saying, I use humor, I try and make them relax. And here you've just told us I can do other things, like the finger holes was such an incredible exercise and activity that so many women used in a variety of situations. They used to come back and say, after every session we had, they would go out, they would go and practice in the community or with their friends, and they would come back and they would say, I tried this practice, this is what happened in the community. And this traditional healer said, I now will use these practices to help people, to get them to relax, because there was a lot of trauma in that community, a lot of things happening. And so I'm just coming back to the issue of Indigenous. Those aren't necessarily Indigenous practices, but they're practices that communities that would generally have not, conservative, religious, would not have, what I thought, taken to it. They took to it so well. It is about people's reality as well. I mean, I used balanced breath work with visualization with these caregivers who work every day in the community. They go out, they look after orphans and vulnerable children and their families. And I mean, I published an article about it, about how they use breath work, to help them to relax, to help them to be able to help other people in the community. Simple breathwork techniques. The fingers was actually quite using the different fingers and breathing through that was quite a popular one, even with children that they worked with. So Ila, I'm not sure if I'm fully answering your question, but what I'm saying is that I think indigenous communities, or communities where indigenous practices have been removed from them, because the reality is, indigenous practices have been lost along the way. They were seen as unscientific. They were seen as, so people have lost a lot of their traditional practices. One of the first things that the traditional healer told me, the one thing that they have retained was the rituals, the ancestral rituals which they have in the community, ceremonies, but most of the others has been lost. And it's been lost because of modernization, because of young people not wanting to practice it any longer, and so on, and feeling it's backward and so on. So that doesn't mean there isn't a need for us to go back to practices that were so inherent in a community. It was part of community practice. And through westernization and so on, people have lost that. Yeah.
So breath becomes a thread of reconnection to that which was already there, and that which lives within their bodies and within the cells of people in the communities, And I think, as you speak, I think about how important it is to retain a sensitivity when we work with communities in that setting. Because it's so easy to enter into that space with the mindset of, I know the answer and I know what's good for you. It's another form of colonization in a way.
Absolutely, yeah.
And another way of imposing what we believe that community needs. And I think one needs to be so careful of not falling into that trap, because it's easy to do that. The savior complex comes in very easily. And so it feels like it is important to give time to understand the context, to have someone who can interpret what is really happening on the ground, what the real challenges are, and who you can kind of co-create with. And it feels like the traditional healer was also so open and receptive to learning. And I think that's really powerful.
No, absolutely. And what was really important, I was going into this community as an outsider. Okay. I was working with this community, and I was needing them to be my focus group that I was going to work with. And so I did a lot of immersion into the community, because I think the whole issue of seeing you as an outsider, don't speak the language, I had to work with an interpreter, they were all very important issues. And after a few weeks of more immersion before I even started the work, what was very interesting is that we started connecting as women.
Okay.
And we started connecting as women. And these women, their experiences, their life experiences were really tragic. From domestic violence that's rife in the community, to just hunger, and like women saying, I'm so stressed because I don't actually know how I'm going to feed my kids tonight. So really, really deep poverty in the community, deep traumatization because of the violence in the community, and so on. And we started connecting that way. We would talk about our children, and they would talk about the experiences they had, and so on. And every single week we were there. The transformation in this group of women was phenomenal. Women who would get up and say, my husband he's not a good person. He abuses me, he shouts at me, he shouts at my children. And then after a couple of weeks and months of working with them, saying, I actually lay down the line with my husband. I told him if he doesn't do A, B, and C, I'm leaving, because I don't like the way he treats me.
And this was as a result of the program that you were running with them.
The confidence that the women developed. anecdotal evidence. I could never speak up for myself. But now that I'm doing this breath work, and now that I'm doing these movements, the things you taught me, because I also did a bit of Tai Chi and those sort of exercises, I feel I've got my voice. I feel I have a voice now. I can walk into the municipal office and I can demand my rights. And one of the key things that I was trying to show, in a sense, in the study was that I didn't just want people to be equipped with the tools for self-care. Yes, that was important. And in that community, it was particularly important, is that people didn't even understand the concept of why do we need to care for ourselves. But then they would take that out into their families and say, we tried this with my daughter's writing matric and she's so anxious. And we did these exercises. I tried this breathing technique with her so that she could relax and study better.
Yeah.
We went to the municipal offices because they cut our water. And as a group of women, we went there and we demanded our rights. And for me, I was trying to show that social justice, yes, it's so important for individual self-care, but the collective concept of community healing and community care is so important. And that's what was demonstrated through this. Women went from the individual to the family to the community. So they extended their reach out into the community. And for me, that is what was so important. Because, if you think about a decolonized approach, we have been so using a Western concept all the time, which is about individual. And here were people who had no option, no access to private psychologists, etc., etc., etc. And they were able to gather the tools themselves to heal themselves, but more importantly, that they could be of better service to the community. So these poor women who earned 1,000 Rand a month as caregivers, that was what they earned a month. They went every single day from 8 to 4, from door to door, walking and looking after other people in the community. They bettered their own service to the community because they had developed these tools that were so important for them. The first time I did a relaxation exercise with them, and I said they should lie down, and I took them through a breathwork exercise. And obviously I didn't use terminology like chakras and so on but I did a visualization exercise, just breathing and so on. And women were in tears. They said, I have never, ever experienced something like that in my life. I've never experienced the sense of relaxation in my life. And I think the important thing, coming back to the individual work versus the collective, is I really believe that there's a saying, and I think Mandela used to say, no woman is free until all women are free. And so basically, honestly, we as individuals will not be free until everyone is free. You can be at peace with yourself through your own self-care, but the world out there impacts on you. So how do you be part of that collective? Because otherwise, it becomes very much an internal thing. It's short-lived. It's not sustainable. How do we begin to be of better service to people out there and extend our reach to people out there? Because the truth is we are very privileged to be able to have what we have, do what we do, and have the resources at our disposal. And I learned a really interesting thing. It was such an important learning journey for me. And I don't know if I said it, but the women used to say all the time, I'm so stressed. And I think I mentioned it earlier on. I used to think, why does everyone use this word stress? I was so stressed, I did this, I did that. And then I said, please tell me why you were stressed. And then they explained why. And I realized that, stress is their daily survival. We feel stressed, we we use our resources at our disposal to try and address our stress. Stress for them is a daily matter of survival. And what this has done, it doesn't take away your poverty, doesn't take away your conditions of unemployment, poverty, and so on and so on. But what it did do is that it gave the women a set of tools that they could use, which empowered them to be able to live their lives in a better way, to deal with the issues and problems in their lives differently. And I think for me, that was such an important finding, that it wasn't about navel gazing and thinking that, people will now adapt to their poverty and they'll feel comfortable with their poverty. Not at all. The agency that they developed, the empowerment that they developed was, let's do something. Let's do something for ourselves. What can we do? Let's do something for our families. And then let's see how we can better things in this community. And so for me, that was a valuable lesson.
Wow, Jessie, there's so much power in the piece that you've just shared. And just going back to how you started this piece was how you established trust within that group, how you connected with that group as an outsider and finding that commonality as women and that shared experience as women. And it was in creating that trust that you established that environment of safety, which enabled them to receive what you were sharing versus feeling that someone is coming in, not understanding my situation, and once again, imposing something on me.
Had to be very careful of that, Ela, because also, the terminology that we use. So, for example, the word chakras was not something, you don't use that in every setting because you recognize that people, apart from not even knowing, they would, there's suspicion, there's conservatism, there's religious issues that clash with it. What are these people teaching us, etc., etc. So I didn't use words like meditation, didn't use words like chakras. I found the terminology that they understood, and it was about breath work. It was about breathing, relaxing, finding yourself in a safe space, helping each other. I had an exercise called the holes, and it was how you could actually help each other. So in other words, two people together, and it's a very good exercise for dealing with trauma, but you use breath quite strongly in this it's a 4-hold exercise, and they would do it with each other. So because they experience so much trauma in their lives, not only personally, but in the community, they were able to do those holds, the breath work holds on each other, and in that way help each other to calm down, to whatever. So I think it is very much about how we give communities, and this has always been my issue. How do we give communities who are so traumatized in our country, who don't have access to resources, how do we give those communities the tools, the breath work that they can use for their own well-being, firstly, because if they're not well, they can't go out and try and help other people. And it's about giving them the tools so that they can live slightly better lives, basically, for themselves.
I think there's so much misconception and misperceptions around what this work is, and associations with spiritual practices that may not be aligned to their belief systems, someone's belief systems. And so that comes with resistance. And also people who are involved in the social justice space, social impact space, often themselves don't quite understand the impact and the importance of bringing this work into community spaces. So, based on your findings and based on your experience and what you are seeing in the world out there and the work that you do, what do you feel needs to happen to make this work more accessible?
So I think there is more of an openness towards it. The community that I was talking about was very conservative, religious community, and they took to breath work and complementary practices so amazingly, right? Now, if you take other work within the social justice sector, for me, the one thing is about how we frame things, how we say things, the wording that we use. Because, so for example, the women in this community that I worked in, they love the idea of closing their eyes, although so many of them couldn't close their eyes because of their own traumas, but closing their eyes and just deep breathing, etc. They loved it because it was so relaxing for them. So they felt the immediate benefits of it, right? And so I think that is more important than the words that we use. We must, rather than the words, the actions. Let's breathe together. I do quite a bit of work in the gender-based violence sector. Those women, whether it's in a shelter or whether it's working with organizations that work in the gender-based violence sector, there is such an important need for their own wellness. I mean, it's such a big issue in the social justice sector at the moment, where the people who do the work and deliver the service are just totally burnt out, exhausted, just totally burnt out. And the amount of people I work with at the moment that are suffering from such extreme burnout, where directors are having to go on extended leaves because they just can't cope. So the work that is being done in the social justice sector is hard. There's very little resources. You're fighting the system all the time. And so the question is, how do we help them? So you're finding different levels in a sense. The people I worked with in Garankuwa, very community-based, and then the other social justice organizations that I work with are more bigger NGOs in Johannesburg, Cape Town, around here, who are so desperately in need of, they're calling it wellness now. There's a big issue around in the social about wellness and how do we introduce wellness? Because we can't continue like this. We totally burnt out. And so I think there is, I mean, for me, I think there's a need to extend it to the social justice sector. This work that needs to be done, and if we frame it in the terms of wellness and well-being, then that is what's resonating with them at the moment. Because the reality is they work in shelters, they work with women who are survivors of gender-based violence, but they are so traumatized and suffering from secondary traumatization and so on that and then they burnt out because they are so tired, etc., etc. There's no facilities for debriefing and all that. So there's a huge opportunity there. But they're also the bigger NGOs. So they unlike the people in Garankuwa where you had to watch language or you had to use certain terminology, I think with the bigger NGOs, they understand the importance of looking at what can we do to heal ourselves so that we can be of better service to the communities that need us.
And you feel there's more openness to that?
Yeah.
Yeah. And
it's
what would it
thing.
take? Sorry, Jess.
No, I was just saying it's a big issue at the moment in the social justice sector. Their own well-being and the burnout of the sector.
Yeah. And so as a Breathwork-Africa community, as a wellness community that, is really committed to supporting communities, supporting carers. What do you feel is our responsibility? What do you feel we can do to bring more awareness to policymakers that this becomes a less disregarded practice?
Yeah. Okay. So in terms of impacting policymakers, I'm wary. I'm wary of that because I think our government is in a state of there's very little delivery happening, and so yeah, I wanted to share an experience, but I don't think I should. But there's very little delivery happening. So if you think you're going to change policy, so there's government, and that's where policy is changed, and then there's this whole social justice NGO sector that is doing a lot of the work on the ground, and the two aren't meeting, right? And so every time, for example, the Department of Social Development decides to cut funding to the social justice sector, to close down shelters, and so on. So that is what the social justice sector is sitting with, the gender-based violence sector, that government is taking the little money they give them to render a service, taking it away or cutting funding. So it's a very difficult situation. It's more about, rather than try to influence policymakers at this point, it's about how do we reach out to the sector that needs help, that needs wellness.
And that's in our sphere of influence. That's most accessible to us.
Absolutely in your sphere of influence. And look at how we can, it's like the women in Garankua. I provided them with the tools that they can use so that they can work with communities and deal with the issues and the problems that communities are facing. And with the people in the NGO sector, it's how can you help us to cope better? Because we are so burnt out and exhausted and depleted. And unless they are, well, how do they then render services to communities who are desperately in need of their services? So, yeah.
I mean, Jess, when you were describing how you designed your study, and I remember that time, and I remember when you started at UJ and how you started thinking about how you were going to design the study. What really struck me was that this was an opportunity to bring your full self into this experience, your personal life experience, your experience with social justice, the practices that you studied and learned, and also that you have used in your own life, and your own profound journey with breath. So, and this is my last question before we move over to questions, because I'd like to give the everybody a space to ask any questions, is how has breath supported you personally in everything that you do and hold?
Okay. So, wow, I didn't realize it's 20 years, Ila. So, I've been on a long journey, a personal journey of healing from various traumas in my own life. And then when I got in touch with Breathwork, at that time it wasn't Breathwork-Africa, but when I got in touch with Ilamanga, and you were doing body work at that time, I think, what do you call it? Body talk, that's right.
You heard me on the radio.
That's right. And I went to Woodlands and I met you, and that was the beginning of a whole long journey. The breath has been the most incredible part of my journey and my healing. And I remember doing a conscious connected breathing session at Woodlands, where I had the most traumatic experience, and I don't know if you remember it.
I do.
But it was also the turning point for me in terms of understanding myself, my body, my breath and how powerful the breath can be. So, when I started doing, when I was doing my advanced practitioner's course and I had to have people that I was working with doing case studies, I did the first conscious connected breathing session with someone. And they had a really profound experience. And after that, they said to every one of their friends and family, please go for a conscious connected breathing session because it is so powerful. So I use the breath for my own power, whether I am starting a workshop, whether I'm going into difficult situations, it has become part of me. And, even if I don't practice it out there, one of my biggest challenges has been, I wish I could use it more. And I have found a way, because what I do now is a lot of what I call organizational healing. So I go into organizations that are in trouble and I work with them to try to do what is called organizational healing, right? And help them to address their own conflicts, their own interpersonal dynamics and issues. And I find that I'm using breath work as part of that, whether it's how we start, whether it's when I'm doing an energizer for them, whether it's how I'm closing the day. And for me, that is resonating with me, but it's also impactful to them. Because they're always asking for more. Don't you want to do that? So I've integrated it now into my work. Initially, I was saying, I want to do breath work. I want to have classes. People don't turn up or, things happen. And now I found a way to integrate it into my everyday work within the social justice sector. And yeah.
Wow. That's incredible, Jessie. Thank you for sharing that. I'm going to open for some questions now. So if anyone would like to ask Jessie anything or reflect anything, you're welcome to just raise your digital hand, unmute, put your camera on. We'd love to see you. Yes, Marge. Thank you.
Hi, Jess. Sure, that is just such a humbling, inspirational story. I mean, it's just absolutely blown me away. And sometimes I think that we don't understand the impact of what we're doing. And then you hear something like this. But my question is around going into communities and how do we sensitize ourselves in terms of not imposing what, if we were attached to an outcome or what we want the community to experience because we've experienced it. And how do we sensitize ourselves in terms of arriving at communities? And often we don't have the opportunity for 6 months with them. We may have like an hour. And so how do we really become aware of what the need is when you have a short space of time and go into that community, but that is also makes a difference?
Yeah. So I think that we have to be careful about being a helicopter. You helicopter in and you helicopter out. Because if you want to work in communities, you have to develop the presence, you have to develop the patience, you've got to develop the trust. So the way to do that is to work through existing organizations. Rather than think you can go into a community and do it. There's a lot of suspicion, there's a lot of, trust issues in communities and so on. So I think it's best to do it through organizations. So for example, I've been thinking very much about, there are a couple of shelters in Johannesburg that are for gender-based violence. And it's for women and their children, right? And the women stay there from between 3 to 6 months. Very often they have no choice, but they end up going back to the abusive home. But for that 3 to 6 months, they're in the shelter. I think they get social work services and so on. Now, can you imagine going to those organizations that run the shelters and saying, we would like to teach the women some skills, life skills, breathwork skills, and so on. And so your entry is through the organization that they know that is providing a service to them. So I think that is, for me, better than just going into a community blindly, or even, I think that is better, because because it's not about just in and out, it's about working also with community on a regular basis. One of the things I regret not doing when I did my thesis was there were 2 or 3 women that were so incredible. They were so powerful. And the intention I'd had was, let's train those 3 women. They come from the community. Let's give them a more, like a breathwork 3-day training program. And then they have the tools and they use it in the community. That for me is a better option than us saying, let's go into the community, unless you come from a community. Like I'm near Westbury, and so I went into the youth center. Well, last year, the youth center called me and said, could you come do some breath work for our new cohort of students? But they know me, so I went in at that request and so on. Otherwise, it's very difficult to get in. And we have to look at other ways that we can access those communities, because I think we have so much to offer.
Thanks, Jessie. Judy.
Hi, Jessie. Judy
Hi.
Bassingthwaighte.
Hey, how are you, Judy?
I know, many, many years ago. Blast from the past.
Yes.
Thank you so much. You've just been so inspiring again. And it's more like really a comment on the importance of language. I am currently doing the advanced practitioners training, and I'm putting my feelers out there, and it's so fascinating. And I've also been playing with just using completely different language. Yeah, I mean, I've done some case studies, and I'm experiencing how to reframe it. And yeah, and I think your last point, I mean, my whole life has been in that social justice field. And so what you were saying there is so crucial, is to build up relationship with communities. And Ella always reminds us not to have that Messiah syndrome. And I mean, I'm now a priest, so I've got to watch that. But that is just so important, training.
Yeah.
Because I mean, people find when I tell them, they want to know what you're doing now, and I tell them I'm training, and I'm like, what? Do you want to come and teach us how to breathe? And my own mother was the case. I mean, she made me laugh so much. And I said, I will relax you. And then I said, come, let's do this. And then I changed it completely. Before she knows, she's been doing breathing and relaxing, and says, wow, that was lekker. That voelt goed. And so, yeah, but just thank you for inspiring me again.
Thank you. Thank you, Judy. Good to see you.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks, Judy.
I want to say the issue of language is so important. And this issue, when I said to people one day in Garankuwa, let's breathe. And some of them were giggling, because the thing is, I mean, we're alive, right? We're breathing. What do you mean, let's breathe? And then when they experienced breathing, wow, it was phenomenal for them, right? So, but we have to watch out. We have to frame things differently, and it differs from community to community. I mean, I've done a chakra breathwork session with a group of women where I didn't use the word chakra at all. I just actually started at the first chakra and didn't mention it. I just said, referred to different parts of the body. And that experience in itself was quite amazing for the women. And I didn't use chakra, I didn't use energy centers, nothing. So it's also about how you adapt to the audience that you have.
Absolutely. and use language that is relatable.
Correct. Correct.
Yeah. And that's not going to be alienating.
That's right.
Yeah. Yeah, meeting people where they're at, you know,
Absolutely.
it's
Absolutely.
wow, Jess. So thank you. I think that we can move on to our session now. Would you like to guide us into a little breath experience?
Yeah, I can do that. Thank you. Thanks, everyone. Okay, so if we could sit comfortably and close your eyes. Or just soften your gaze if that is better. Rest your hands on your lap. And just allow your body to arrive fully in the moment. Take a deep breath through your nose and exhale gently through your mouth. Again, breathe in deeply and let it go slowly. Now let your breath just settle into its natural rhythm. As you breathe, notice your own body, the rise and fall of your chest, the gentle rhythm of life within you. Inhale and feel your lungs expand. Exhale, feel your body soften. With each inhale, silently say to yourself, I receive. And with each exhale, I release. So breathing in, you're receiving calm, strength, and steadiness. Breathing out, you're releasing tension, fear, doubt. This breath is a gift, a reminder that you are alive, here, and present. Now imagine your breath as a ripple moving outward. With each inhale, draw in strength for yourself. With each exhale, allow that strength to extend beyond you. Bring to mind vulnerable people and communities around us. Those who face daily struggles, inequalities, hardships. As you inhale, gather warmth and compassion. And as you exhale, Send that compassion outwards towards them. With every breath, let your circle widen to your loved ones, to your neighbors, to those who are unseen, unheard, or struggling in silence. Breathe in. I strengthen myself. Breathe out. I strengthen others. Breathing in, I find peace. Breathing out, I offer peace. Inhale nourishment and exhale care, support, and solidarity. Feel how your breath connects you to a web of life larger than yourself. Slowly bring your attention back to your body. Feel your feet on the ground or in your seat, in the chair you're sitting in, your hands resting. And take one deep breath in together and exhale fully. Know that your breath is not only for you. It is a bridge linking you to the well-being of others and reminding you of our shared humanity. When you're ready, gently open your eyes. Carry this awareness forward. With every breath, may you live in connection, in compassion, and care. Thanks again.
Thank you, Jessie, for that really beautiful practice. A breath that is really a celebration of embodied Ubuntu. Thank you for enriching us with such an inspiring, powerful, and heartfelt conversation. Thank you for who you are, what you do in this world, for what you've always done in this world. We celebrate you and we are so grateful for you and for your generous heart and for your commitment to making this world a better place and for really living that truth. Thank you, Jessie.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody, for joining us. And for those of you who are listening afterwards, we hope that you enjoyed this conversation. We'll see you again next month. Lots of love, everybody. Keep breathing.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank
Bye,
you.
Jessie.
Bye. Bye-bye.